thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have Ben Cuevas here to talk about their work, which is currently on view in non-binary code here at Studio 203. So we're going to learn a little bit more about the creative process behind these pieces, as well as a little bit about your practice, right? A little bit of an overview and kind of how we got here and how Ben got here and making these pieces. So I'm going to do a quick intro and share Ben's bio. So born in Southern California in 1987, Ben Cuevas is an artist whose work is rooted in concepts of otherness and intersectionality, inspired by their queer, non-binary, HIV-positive, and Latinx lived experience. Cuevas received their BA in mixed media installation and photography at Hampshire College in 2010. Cuevas' work has been shown across the U.S. with exhibitions held at the Craft and Folk Art Museum, which is now Craft Contemporary, in LA, Museum of the City of New York, the Leslie Lohman Museum in New York City, among others. Several books and publications feature Cuevas' work, such as Duets, Ben Cuevas and Annie Sprinkle in Conversation, published by Visual Aids, Queer Threads, Crafting, Identity, and Community, edited by John Chaich and Todd Oldham. Acclaimed as a public speaker, Cuevas has given talks at institutions including Brown University, Ohio State University, the Museum of Sex in New York, and the Fire Island Residency. And we're so excited to have you here. And I'm just going to let Ben take it away. So thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Anissa, and thank you everyone for coming today. I just want to say thanks to Anissa and Studio 203 for bringing me here to do this exhibition. It's such an honor and so wonderful to have all of you here in the audience today and watching virtually too. And big thanks to Grant as well for all of the tech support to make this happen. I want to talk about this exhibition here titled Non-Binary Code. Here is sort of like the central installation of the work. So all of the work here, the textile pieces that you're seeing, were created using a pattern that I made out of binary code. So I identify as non-binary, and I wanted to make work that was like a meditation on gender identity. I work a lot with ideas around knitting and gender, knitting being a very gendered medium associated with women's work, and there's this great history going back to artists in like the 70s and second wave feminism making work about gender with textiles. So that's sort of like a lineage that I see my work connected to. And there are interesting connections to code too, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. But first I just want to sort of like elucidate the code that made all of this possible. So I took the word non-binary and translated it into binary code using the ASC2 Unicode, which assigns a string of 8 numbers to each character in the alphabet. And then knitting is an inherently binary system. It works off of this system of knit and purl stitches, which is the difference between a knit and a purl is just if you're holding your yarn in the front versus in the back while you're knitting. But those two different stitches can create like an entire universe of options in knitting. And I found it very interesting that there was like this binary system that I could work with, but also try to transcend at the same time by using it to speak about non-binary identity and to literally code non-binariness into the very fabric itself, code meaning into every stitch. And here you can see the Jacquard loom, which was really actually the first computer that was ever created. Joseph Jacquard invented this loom in 1804 and used a system of punch cards, which was the very first genesis of binary code. So binary code has this really rich history that goes all the way back to the beginning of textiles being part of computing. And here too, another influence on the work is Crocheted Environment by Faith Wilding from 1972. This piece was part of an exhibition called Woman House, which was in Newhall here near CalArts. And it was an incredible feminist installation where women took over this entire house and made work about gender and domesticity. And Crocheted Environment really inspired me to think about using gender with knitting and also to like do a created environment out of textiles. Like, what does it mean to be in an environment made out of textiles, and how does that let you contemplate the work and the ideas behind it in a different way? So I'll get more into the details of this work in a bit, but at first I want to contextualize this work within the scope of my practice. Because there's been a real evolution in my work from my early work, which was more representational, to this work, which is much more abstract. But I've really been working with the same ideas throughout my practice, so I want to go into that in a little more depth. Here you see a knit heart. This is the first sculpture that I ever knit. I was really interested in anatomy and the body, and I wanted to see what would happen if I knit something inside the body in a material that we're used to seeing outside the body. So this idea of like pairing of opposites, pairing opposites to sort of like transcend the opposite, their very like binary nature. This was part of a bigger series of anatomical pieces that I created. And each one corresponds to one of the chakras, because I'm very interested in this idea of knitting as something meditative, knitting as meditation. So that's something I try to reference through my work. And also interested in ideas of gender here early on in my work too, with this genitosexual piece here, which corresponds to the second chakra, which is all about creativity. And I didn't want to like privilege any one gender over another in representing this. So I wanted to create an object that referenced genitalia and gender that combined everything together. And so that's where that form comes from here. Here is my knit skeleton installation, part of the piece called Transcending the Material. And here, the skeleton is seated in lotus position, which is another reference to that idea of knitting as a meditative practice. And here, this piece is called Masculine Feminine. This is like the first time I really like took gender on as like a larger theme in my work. And even back then, I was moving more towards abstraction as I was like working with more abstract concepts around gender. So for me, the piece is sort of like a model of my personal gender identity. It's like there are these two poles of masculinity and femininity referenced by the mannequins, and they're like rigid and unattainable. But straddling that is this soft, cozy, warm, tailored garment, which to me is sort of like a representation of gender expression. I feel like my gender expression is a patchwork of various masculinities and femininities that all straddle these binary poles of masculine and feminine. And there's some humor like in this piece too. Each of one of the squares features a pattern that looks like either penises or vulvas. So referencing gender there as well, but also being a little playful and tongue-in-cheek with it in a subtle kind of a way. And the colors here, I chose the pink and gray because I wanted a masculine and a feminine color. I didn't want to be too on the nose with pink and blue. And then I thought gray kind of speaks to how people don't often get to have as much fun when they're expressing masculine. Gray is a less fun color, and the hot magenta pink is a much more fun color. And I think there's a lot more fun and room for expression and femininity in that way. So that's the color choice here. You can also see my exploration of the textile environment here in this piece called Pillows from 2017. I took various medicines that I've used at various points in treating my HIV and blew them up huge and turned them into an installation where people could come and lounge on the pillows. I wanted to give people a very comfortable space to talk about HIV treatment and prevention, and invite people to get comfortable talking about something that might be uncomfortable otherwise. And here is, I eventually started to get interested in the idea of working on the wall and working in 2 dimensions. These pieces are from a series called Tweetables, where I knit text in 140 characters or less. And this is like my interest in internet culture coming through and blending the digital with the handmade, which you can also see moving forward into the non-binary code work. And the artist Rosemary Trockle was a very big influence on my Tweetables series. So Rosemary Trockle in the 80s started making these knit canvases, and I'm not sure if she's the first person who ever knit a painting, but she's the first example that I've been able to find. So I feel like my work is very much in dialogue with hers. And this was my last solo show called Querying the Landscape. I took photographs in Joshua Tree National Park, and then I created these textile wall hangings based off of the photographs. I used a stitch called faggoted fringe. So this is another example of me sort of like coding meaning into the stitch work. Faggoting and knitting is a lace making technique, but I love the linguistic sort of double entendre there. And so I really wanted to find a very queer way of representing the landscape and my time at this artist residency where I made this work. So I thought faggoted fringe was a great way to do that. And here you can also see my color palette starting to get more minimal and going to this neutral color palette. For this show, that was really a response to the vernacular art of Joshua Tree. There is a huge tradition of people doing these macrame pieces there. You see them in like every gift shop and in every house and Airbnb. There's macrame everywhere you go in Joshua Tree. So I wanted to make work that really spoke to the vernacular art of the region. And that's something, oh yeah, here's a closer up piece where you can see the photograph that influenced the wall hanging for Querying the Landscape. And that brought me to non-binary code here. So I think you can kind of see all of those various ideas from my practice sort of gelling and coming together into this work. The installation here, compositionally, was very much inspired by the Rothko Chapel. Rothko's work here is really about, the sublime and like just about color and composition and giving people a space in which to experience that work. So that's something that I wanted to bring into my work too. Rothko similarly plays with triptychs and then larger panels as well, which is something I'm doing here in this work as well. And people are invited to don these white coveralls and be part of the central installation and lounge in the non-binary pillows. And I really wanted to like complicate ideas around utility, and I think that having these coveralls, which are a very utilitarian object, allows people to literally become part of the art and use these pillows as objects of utility that are also made out of the same material as the art on the walls. So it's really complicating the relationship between art as the object versus art as utility. Yeah, it's also just giving people a comfortable space too to talk about ideas around gender and identity. I've seen people have like really awesome conversations at the opening and stuff about those ideas that maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's about facilitating that conversation through space and material. And speaking of material, everything you see here is made out of acrylic fiber. The yarn that I was using is acrylic. It's like a tube that's stuffed with polyester fiberfill. And for me, putting acrylic onto canvas really brings the work in dialogue with painting, and specifically in dialogue with the work of Agnes Martin. Agnes Martin is famous for making these white paintings that are really about the ideas of the sublime and transcendence and repetition. Here you can see the grid in a little bit more detail. And I think whenever you're working with the color white and the grid, you're speaking to Agnes Martin's work. Here you can see this idea of the grid, which is inherent to knitting. Knitting is always going to be a grid. And Agnes Martin had a very interesting relationship to gender herself. She was making work at a time when the art historical canon was like a total boys club, and but her work was so great that it was getting attention in ways that other women's work wasn't. But in reviews and stuff, people kept referring to her as a female artist or a woman artist, and she really resisted that. She was like, "Yes, I'm a woman, but I'm an artist. Like, you can just call me an artist." So I think that sort of impetus to contextualize oneself within gender in relation to one's work is something that's very much carried forward into this work here as well. So here you can see the stitch work up close, and in knitting, anywhere you see a V is a knit stitch, and anywhere you see a bar is a purl stitch. So you can kind of read the code in that way if you really try. It's you kind of need to be a computer to actually decipher it, but the meaning is all in there. And these canvases also play with the idea of revealing and concealing. I was really into how the back of the canvases looked when I started stringing them up, and I wanted to find a way to bring that onto the front because I just found it so aesthetically compelling. And I also felt like it spoke to ideas around being non-binary and how we reveal or conceal aspects of our gender at any given time. Like sometimes it might not be as safe to reveal something about your gender, so you conceal it. Other times you might want to be seen, so you reveal something about your gender identity more. And it was also really inspired by this meme. You are invited to a gender conceal party, which was a reaction to the idea of gender reveal parties. And yeah, I love that there was this sort of like queer, hilarious response to that. And that's where the idea of revealing and concealing sort of started trickling into my consciousness and came out through this work. So in terms of process, I started by knitting all of the textile pieces, and they totally took over my home/workspace for several months. It's been about a 6-month process creating all of this work. Kind of a year long, but mostly 6 months in the most intense part. So I knit all of the textile work at home, and I had a team of 2 assistants helping me out as well. Without my assistants, Tex, Arden, and Elise Stubbs, like I never would have been able to knit everything in time. So it was amazing to have that kind of help in creating this work. And then once all the pieces were knit, we strung them up on the canvases here using this grid system with cotton cord. And the larger canvases had to go on the floor, and the bigger ones we did on the tables. And that all led to the installation here. So yeah, I think if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer anything if anything came up for anybody. Yes?
So if I understood correctly the way you just explained it, it is reasonable in that like the alternations between, so it's not necessarily like reading non-binary up and down, you can read it across the way
Exactly, you read it across, yeah, because as you're knitting, you're going left to right or right to left, and it sort of like spirals up on itself. Oh, great.
Wait a second.
Excellent.
I love the evolution. Like, it was really nice to see all of the different components, because I feel like I've been following your practice since 2015, 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while. It's been a journey.
Totally.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun to show the evolution here. Yeah. For me, the idea really takes primacy in creating work. Like, so I let the idea come first, and then I figure out how it fits into the trajectory of my practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Since you've been talking about your work evolving, have you already thought about what your next step is going to be?
Next, I'm going all the way back to the knit skeleton piece, and I'm going to make a body of skeletal work and create a pattern of the skeleton as well. People have been asking for a pattern for that piece for over a decade now.
That's such an awesome piece.
Oh, thank
That was
you.
how I first discovered.
Same
it.
here.
Yeah. Thank you.
It was in a window display.
Yes, at Knit Culture Studio. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Which studio?
Knit Culture Studio.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, so I'm going back to that and making a pattern out of it, and the pattern will become a coffee table book. That's my next project.
So we have a question from Carrie.
Mhm.
Would you consider creating other work using two contrasting yarns to reveal the code more prominently?
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting idea. For me, I kind of like that the code is a little bit more secret. You kind of have to go to the cipher to see it. So I enjoy the subtlety of the monotone.
It might mess up the cameras, but it would be fun if you could spell out a letter or show us. I mean, can you see it well enough to do that?
Oh gosh, I'd have to know where in the pattern
Curious.
it is. I can get it out on my phone and try to find a letter.
I think about those robot movies where they read in binary, and so like, I can imagine them scanning this.
Let's see. So, let's see. We have
Here, hold on, let me.
0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. I have no idea what that corresponds to. I'm totally lost. Yeah, it would take a lot to find out.
That's an N.
It could be.
You internalized it more as the technique of the knitting you were doing. Whatever. It's interesting how you started with that, but in the process, it feels like it became more about the muscle memory of when you were alternating.
Sure.
And you can read that.
Mm-hmm.
That's more intuitive almost in the process.
Absolutely.
But it's cool that the way that you structured all of it, it correlates to this larger meaning. So,
Mhm.
you know, like, you can't necessarily read the words yourself, but you know what each of them means as it relates to the non-binary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So just make sure I understand, because so each letter goes. It's basically spelling up. It's spelling top to bottom.
Spelling left to right and then back again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of like spirals back and forth.
You would mention that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like non-binary, basically.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else?
It's a beautiful installation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. So glad to have you here, and so glad to chat about the work with y'all. Yeah. Thanks again, Anissa.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.